My name is Eric Arnow. I'm retired living in Thailand. I've had several professions, but my degree was in German literature. I wanted to understand how a country that produced such great thinkers as Kant, Nietzsche, Goethe, Schiller, Hesse, as well as great composers, could have produced a regime that killed all but 2 members of my European family during World War II. I trained as a Zen monk for several years. There's a particular passage spoken 2,500 years ago by a student of the Buddha. Inner tangle, outer tangle, this whole generation in a tangle. Who will untangle the tangle? The Buddha replied, that person, ardent and sagacious, will untangle the tangle. So you could say my life's work is to better understand both myself, but also the broader society and ultimately geopolitics. Because of my Jewish background in Eastern Europe, I had a particular affinity for Russia. While I've had a couple of businesses, my true calling is seeking truth. When I visited Crimea, I visited Russia and Crimea in 2015. I had heard of trouble and the coup fomented by Victoria Nuland, and later realized that Joe Biden was directly overseeing it. Plus, 2015 was the 70th anniversary of Victory Day. The USSR's victory was extremely important, but the West was unappreciative. So I wanted to pay my respects to Russia and also needed to see and verify for myself what was going on in Crimea, given the US narrative of Russia's invasion and oppression. I had several life-changing meetings in Sevastopol, the major Black Sea port. First was Melita, my hostess at the hostel I was staying at. By coincidence or fate, my friend Regis Tremblay had interviewed her the following year. Melita told me a lot of historical background about Sevastopol and its role during the Soviet Union. Second, a refugee from Donetsk in the Donbass, that's the breakaway republic of Ukraine. He, his wife, and son were staying at the hostel too. Their house and that of his mother had been bombed and destroyed by the Ukrainian thugs who took over the government after the US-sponsored coup. Sometimes a plane would fly overhead of the hostel, and he'd dive under the bed, so traumatized as he was by the attacks on him, a civilian. Next was the librarian at the Leo Tolstoy Library. She showed me books in English with notes by Mark Twain, the famous American author, which praised Russia for its support of the US during the US Civil War. The British and French wanted to keep the Confederacy for its slave system, which they profited from. Tchaikovsky, the great composer, spoke of the bond of friendship he felt between the US and Russia. The irony of the US repudiating that friendship is quite painful to me. A young woman, a soldier. She had been a soldier in the Ukrainian army in 2013. Her military base in Ukraine was raided in 2013. So she knew the trouble lay ahead. The coup occurred. She deserted the Ukrainian army and headed back home to Sevastopol to protect the city from fascist forces bent on attacking Sevastopol, just as they had attacked Donetsk and Lugansk. And fifth was a very unusual meeting with a polite green man. I was walking in Sevastopol on a hill, and there was a very beautiful building there, and I was admiring this building for several minutes. After a little bit of time, this polite green man came out, no weapons, wasn't carrying any gun or anything, and he pointed to the sign on the building, which in my very poor Russian, I realized it was the headquarters of the FSB, which is the equivalent of the FBI and the successor of the old KGB. Well, you might have thought that I would have been, had a bag put over my head and dragged in for interrogation. Of course, nothing like that happened. And this just proves that what Victoria Nuland was saying about the danger of the Russians was completely unfounded. My impressions of Crimea are that I saw a country that was in many ways suffering from neglect. Its buses were at least 30 years old, and many people were forced to sell what little they could grow or make since the economy was in bad shape. However, after World War II, a number of very beautiful buildings were built. And of course, visiting Yalta, where FDR, Stalin, and Roosevelt met towards the end of World War II, was very meaningful for me. My chance to be in such a historical place moved me quite a bit. I was in the place where they negotiated what would happen after World War II. I also saw how beautiful Crimea is geographically. And when I visited the memorial to the charge of the Light Brigade of Crimean War and poetic fame, I could see how Crimea is a very valuable piece of real estate and why many countries want it for themselves. My belief about Crimea returning to Russia, it was a referendum, it wasn't annexed or invaded. It was very clear that the serious threat of neo-Nazi gangs descending on Crimea caused the Russian-speaking population in Crimea to seek refuge in Russia. It was after the people voted overwhelmingly to leave Ukraine. After all, Khrushchev illegally attached Crimea to Ukraine in a sort of shotgun marriage. And the Kiev government treated the people poorly, demanding that they use Ukrainian language when their only language is Russian. Plus, the Kiev regime did nothing economically for Crimea, basically treating it as an abused spouse. So Crimea overwhelmingly petitioned Russia to leave its abusive spouse and come back to Mother Russia. Fortunately, Russia accepted the request. Also, Crimeans begged the Russian troops already at the port of Sevastopol to protect them from Kiev's marauders. Russian troops were there by contract with the Ukrainian government. As far as sanctions is concerned, the first sanctions, I think, were in response to the slanderous allegation that Russia shot down a civilian airliner during the hostilities in the Donbass region. My own research indicated that Ukraine shot it down and blamed Russia. And of course, because the US felt sour grapes for quote unquote losing Crimea after the coup, it instituted sanctions against Crimea. While there, my credit card was useless, so I barely had enough cash to pay for my expenses there. Sanctions are a replay of siege warfare, similar to besieging a city during the Middle Ages so as to starve the people into submission. That is standing operating procedure for US foreign policy. So why did I join the Friends of Crimea Club, USA? We citizens of the world, and especially of Western countries, that have turned reality on its head, blaming their victim, in this case, Russia and Crimea, have a special responsibility to, as it said, speak truth to power. My American friends, where my family lives and my friends live, have been lied to about Russia. One of my dearest friends insisted that he knows what's going on in Russia. So I said to him, are you going to believe CNN, NPR, and the New York Times, or me, your trusted friend, who actually went to Crimea to see for myself? We are in a war, an information war, an economic war, which could become a real war that seriously threatens life on the planet. The only antidote to this mental illness in the West is reality therapy. We need to speak the truth about Crimea. That's why I joined the Friends of Crimea Club. We need citizen witnesses and supporters of Crimea to stand up to the lies that are constantly told by the Western media. Thanks for listening.